This podcast is supported by Progressive, a leader in RV insurance. RVs are for sharing adventures with family, friends, and even your pets. So if you bring your cats and dogs along for the ride, you'll want Progressive RV insurance. They protect your cats and dogs like family by offering up to $1,000 in optional coverage for vet bills in case of an RV accident, making it a great companion for the responsible pet owner who loves to travel. See Progressive's other benefits and more when you quote RV insurance at Progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Pet injuries and additional coverage and subject to policy terms.
Last week was our first playoff game, and my plaque psoriasis was so itchy under all my gear. Sometimes just thinking about scratching could take me out of the moment. And then my doctor told me I could get clearer skin with a pill called Otezla.
Otezla apremilast is a prescription medicine used to treat adult patients with plaque psoriasis for whom phototherapy or systemic therapy is appropriate. Otezla can help you get clearer skin after just 4 months.
Okay, ready for the next game. Talking to my doctor about a pill was a total game changer.
Don't use Otezla if you're allergic to it. Get medical help right away if you have trouble breathing or swallowing, swelling of the face, lips, tongue, throat, or arms. Severe diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, depression, suicidal thoughts, or weight loss can happen. Tell your doctor if any of these occur and if you have a history of depression or suicidal thoughts. Live in the moment. Ask your doctor about Otezla. Call 1-844-4-OTEZLA or visit Otezla.com for prescribing info about cost, and more.
Welcome back, True Crime Army. I am your host, Margot, and this is Military Murder, a show where I focus on crimes committed by military members and veterans. But if you found this show by chance, you don't have to worry about it because you don't need to know anything about the military to listen. True crime just has to be your morbid curiosity. And if that's you, welcome home. All right, today's case is hot off the press. I almost covered it in my headlines episode that I'm going to put out in a few weeks, but when I realized how much information was available, I knew that I had to do a deep dive. Today, I am delving into a case that is almost unbelievable. It's about a serial predator inside the Army, like no kidding, hide in the bushes, break into your house, shadow that lurks around every corner type of case. And the base? Well, Fort Cavazos, formerly Fort Hood. Well, Fort Cavazos is no stranger to headline-making cases, but even I am a little bit shook that a predator lurked for so long, 18 months long, terrorizing women who lived in the barracks room on base. We're talking rapes, break-ins, and even an attempted murder. With that, please be advised that this episode is not suitable for young listeners or viewers. The topics mentioned above are very serious, so please listen with care. Join me today as I tell you a case about a predator in the barracks by the name of Sergeant Greville Clarke. Now, let's dig in.
Military murder is an independent project and is not endorsed by the Department of Defense or any military component. The views expressed are those of the host. The content of this podcast is not meant to be legal or medical advice. Warning, this episode contains graphic details of murder. It is not suitable for young listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
Fort Hood, Fort Cavazos, call it what you want, but what you won't be calling it is crime-free. I mean, no military base is crime-free. But anyway, Fort Cavazos, formerly Fort Hood, is one of the largest Army posts in the United States, and it's had more than its fair share of tragedy and scandal throughout the years. In 2020, the base came under national scrutiny. I'm talking about national scrutiny after the murder of Specialist Vanessa Guillen, a young soldier who disappeared from Fort Hood and was later found dead. That case exposed a lot of problems at Fort Hood. In fact, Army officials admitted around that time that Fort Hood had the highest number of sex assaults, harassment incidents, and even murders of any Army installation. An independent review of the base's culture in 2020 concluded that the command climate was permissive of sexual assault and sexual harassment. Basically, leadership wasn't taking these problems seriously enough, creating an environment where predators felt emboldened. After this very public 2020 investigation, the Army fired or suspended 14 leaders at Fort Hood. They also launched a new group called the People First Task Force to implement reforms, new protocols for missing soldiers, improvements to how they handle sex assault cases, and eventually even changing the base's name from Fort Hood to Fort Cavazos in 2023, partly to start a new chapter. But here's the thing. Even with all this happening, between 2021 and 2022, right there on Fort Hood, 5 women became victims of a serial unidentified rapist. And the attacks occurred where soldiers should feel safe, inside the barracks. It's horrifying. How did one soldier conduct such brazen attacks, and why did it take 18 months to catch him? All right, so let's get into the first attack. It's March 16th, 2021. We're at Fort Hood, as it was still called back then. These are small, dorm-style rooms where junior soldiers live. She probably felt reasonably safe. I mean, having served on active duty for 11 years myself, while I never lived in the barracks, I did stay in academic living arrangements, which I imagine are very similar to barracks room. And I know that when I stayed there, I always felt safe. So I imagine the same can be said of this young soldier. Except that as she was sleeping on March 16th, 2021, something woke her up in the middle of the night. As she opened her eyes, she realized that an uninvited man was standing in her room. Before she could scream, the man grabbed her. She saw the flash of a knife. He was armed, and he held the blade up to her. As her heart pounded out of her chest, the intruder tied her hands, and it's clear that he intended to violate her body. Now, this wasn't a quick grab-and-run burglary. He's after her. We don't have all the graphic details of what he did in this first attack. The records say he held her at knife point with the intent to rape and assault. After the brutal and terrifying attack, the attacker slipped away into the night. The young resident of the room is now left terrorized and probably injured. This soldier immediately reported what happened to her. I mean, an intruder attacking a soldier on post is a huge deal. And after her report, Army CID, basically like the OSI/CSI of the military or of the Army, they start investigating. But the thing is, they don't have much to go off of because the victim, she can't give any real descriptions of the guy. She never saw his face clearly. She was terrorized. It was a lot to take in. So while a CID case was opened, it basically went nowhere. And most disturbingly, there is no alert that ever went out to the rest of the base, like saying, hey, be on the lookout. We have this reported intruder who entered a female soldier's room. Nothing. There's no widespread warning to other women in the barracks that this happened, at least not publicly. In fact, a member of the military murder Facebook group said that, she said this very recently, actually, within the last week. She said that she was in a leadership position when she was stationed at Fort Cavazos at this time while this was happening, and that she had no clue that this was going on, even though she herself had soldiers who were living in the barracks room. Like, that's really disturbing. I would say maybe since it was the first attack, it's possible that the victim's immediate chain of command knew and told some people to be cautious, but there was no base-wide announcement at that time. And remember, it's March of 2022. So that case just sat quietly. And for about a year, nothing else happened. It seemed like maybe it was an isolated incident. Had an outsider somehow snuck onto base and left never to return again? I mean, we know better. But, I guess it's possible. But really, the real culprit was still on base, but he was laying low. So let's fast forward to March 5th, 2022, almost a year later. So I think I misspoke. That first incident happened in March of 2021. So the base is still officially named Fort Hood at the time. The renaming to Fort Cavazos hasn't happened yet, as that happens later in 2023. And that's when another female soldier is in her barracks room at night. And it happens again. A man forces his way into her room and he's got a knife. This time, there may have been 2 women in the room. And that's when the perpetrator basically ties them both up or something like that, and he rapes one of them. And I don't think he rapes the other one, but the whole point is that he has officially kidnapped 2 women. Now, imagine the terror. 2 young soldiers cornered by a knife-wielding intruder, and the perpetrator overpowers the 2 of them. Again, the perpetrator leaves these women traumatized and disappears into the night without getting caught. And just like the year before, the women report the crime. Now, CID knows there's definitely a perpetrator operating in the barracks. 2 attacks, similar in nature, about a year apart, both targeting female soldiers in their rooms. That's a huge red flag that there is a serial offender, or at least one in the making. But again, as far as we know, no suspect is identified. And then there is an escalation in how this perpetrator basically lurks through the night. It's the early morning hours of July 15th, 2022, when a 19-year-old female soldier, our fourth known victim, heard a knock on her barracks room door, and it was just after 2 a.m. When she peeked through the door, or the peephole, she saw a man in Army uniform standing outside. He had sergeant stripes. He was an NCO. Now, it's late and unexpected, but seeing the uniform and the rank, this soldier might have thought, well, maybe it's someone from my unit or an NCO just doing a check. So, trusting the uniform, she opened the door. She couldn't make out the man's face because although he was wearing his full military uniform, he was wearing what appeared to be a black COVID mask, basically covering his face. He asked the soldier about a different soldier and whether she lived there, and she responded no. And that's when her nightmare began. The man lifted his shirt to reveal a gun and then forced his way into her room, brandishing the pistol so that she knew that he was serious. You see, by this point, he had upgraded from a knife to a gun. He immediately threatened the soldier, and over the next 4 hours, he tortured this woman in unspeakable ways. Throughout these 4 hours, he undressed the victim, tied her up, gagged her with her own shirt, and then raped her. It was during this attack that the victim became physically ill, and she started to make gagging noises. And that's when the perpetrator began to waterboard the victim. Yes, you heard me correctly. I said waterboard, like the torture method. The waterboarding made the gagging worse, so he took a lamp cord and strangled the victim with it until she passed out. He further stepped on her neck, trying to ensure that she was dead. Believing he killed her, he left her on the floor and left. The victim, well, she remained unconscious until she came to in the morning. Thankfully, she survived. However, she didn't immediately report upon waking up. She didn't answer any calls that morning, but eventually one of her friends came to her room and was like, "What's wrong with you? Like, what's going on?" This victim did end up reporting what happened to her later that day. Once authorities discovered who the culprit was, which we don't immediately know right now, they would charge him with attempted murder for this incident when he strangled the woman with the cord. Now, this survivor's courage to testify despite her near-death experience is one of the only reasons that Clarke was stopped. But at the time, in July of 2022, even though she survived and she could tell investigators what happened, all that she remembered was that a male soldier with sergeant rank and a mask knocked on her door and she answered. We would later learn that the perpetrator was trying to cover his tracks because when investigators went back to search this victim's room, missing from her room was her cell phone, her keys, her wallet, her watch, and even her bed sheets, her blankets, and the pillows. That's right, the perpetrator took all of those items with him, and we would later learn that he disposed of them for fear of them containing some sort of DNA evidence. This perpetrator was calculating and meticulous in covering his tracks, which should have really caused CID to put out some sort of base-wide alert. But nope can do, amigo. They still did not. In fact, this survivor, who had been strangled almost to death, would later say that when she tried to get help immediately after, some people didn't even believe what she told them. Attacked in the barracks room? Left for dead? In the barracks room? No way, they told her. Can you imagine the horror that this poor soldier had to endure? This seriously makes me so sick to my stomach. This victim's words about her experience post-attack speaks to a culture where, despite all the awareness campaigns in the world, a claim of a barracks assault by a stranger might be met with skepticism, which is why you need to be listening and watching more of my videos, because that's exactly what I cover. You have to remain vigilant always, and these things happen. Ultimately, though, CID obviously knew there was a perpetrator, but still, July turned into August, August turned into September, and still there were no arrests. That last victim, she could hardly go on. Today's episode is sponsored by Acorns, and April is Financial Literacy Month, an entire month dedicated to taking control of your money, because honestly, no one really taught me how to manage money growing up. I didn't learn about investing until I was well into adulthood. But what I love about Acorns is that it makes it easy to start saving and investing for your future in just 5 minutes. I know, April is an entire month, but you don't need an entire month to learn. You don't need to be an expert. Acorns recommends a diversified portfolio that matches you and your goals. You can start with just your spare change, and you don't need a lot of time. Setup takes just 5 minutes because I know that your time is precious. And if financial wellness has ever felt out of reach, Acorns makes it simple, giving your money a chance to grow without the overwhelm. Personally, using Acorns gave me the confidence to stop putting it off and just start. And that peace of mind is completely worth it. Sign up now and join over 14 million all-time customers who've already saved and invested over $25 billion with a B dollars with Acorns. Head to acorns.com/militarymama or download the Acorns app to get started today. Paid non-client endorsement. Compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Tier 1 compensation provided. Investing involves risk. Acorns Advisors, LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/militarymama.
This episode is brought to you by Netflix. 3 couples, 4 vacations, a lot to unpack. Watch The 4 Seasons, a new series starring comedy favorites Tina Fey, Steve Carell, Will Forte, Coleman Domingo, and more in a hilarious and heartfelt love letter to long-term relationships. Based on the original Alan Alda film. Watch The 4 Seasons, streaming now only on Netflix.
She was afraid of every man in uniform, and although she dreamt of being a soldier for as long as she could remember, wearing the uniform and stepping on base was way too much to handle. So she eventually left the military, and it was devastating for her. So let's go back to Fort Hood. Fort Hood at the time had many issues with security in the barracks room. It wasn't just these attacks. There were reports of broken door locks, poor lighting, and even a lack of security cameras at some of the barracks rooms, which soldiers said made it easier for intruders to get in unnoticed. In fact, a Government Accountability Office, GAO, report later highlighted that unsecured barracks doors were a known problem. One soldier told investigators that an ex-spouse had literally walked into a barracks and assaulted someone due to a broken door lock. But while you might be thinking that it would be easy to find one soldier, you have to remember the victims can barely give a description of the dude. And Fort Hood is huge, with tens of thousands of soldiers. Without a DNA sample or a clear ID, how do you find one perpetrator in that large of a population? I mean, it's tough. The Army hasn't shared whether they had a suspect list by this third incident, but we know that it wouldn't be until the perpetrator's next attack when the guy would finally be caught and finally stopped. Now we come to October 2nd, 2022. It's a Sunday morning, broad daylight, and a female soldier is in her barracks room cleaning. Now, I haven't explained this before, but the barracks room are like motel-style rooms where every room exits to an outdoor hallway. The locks were very similar to the hotel rooms where there's like this little latch on the door, and if you open the latch out as the door is open and you let the door close, the door won't lock on you. Okay, so now that you have this background, let's get into it. On this Sunday, there was a female soldier, who was doing laundry. She gathered her laundry items in her room and then she left. But before leaving, she let out that little latch so that her room wouldn't lock. Then she went to the community laundry room and did her thing. Upon returning back to her room, her Sunday cleaning continued. At some point, it was time to scrub the toilet. But what she didn't know was that while she was in the laundry room, a soldier snuck into her bathroom and was waiting to ambush her. The female soldier is now in her bathroom scrubbing her toilet when suddenly the curtain swings open and it's a complete stranger wielding a gun. The man orders her not to scream. He drops her to the ground. He undresses her except for her shirt. He then ties her hands, blindfolds her, and then he takes her phone and demands all of her passwords, specifically all of the passwords for her bank and credit cards. During the attack, the man beats the woman, he pistol whips her, and then he sexually assaults her at gunpoint. Then, while she is still naked, he takes nude photos of the victim using his cell phone. And I don't know how it's possible, but as reported by Stars and Stripes, the perpetrator then stole $14,000 from the victim, and this will later be reflected on the charge sheet. After he was done, he forced the victim to shower. Then he put an army belt around her waist. Now, throughout her attack, this victim is asking the perpetrator a ton of questions, peppering him with questions to the point where he tells her to stop making sense. Then he tells her the most horrifying, terrifying thing imaginable. He tells the woman that he is going to take her to another room where he has prepared to kill her. What in the world? I can only imagine that she is freaking out. She is full of sheer terror. A million things are going through her head all at once. At that point, the perpetrator then tries to fit the woman into a suitcase, which is terrifying. But when it doesn't work, he walks over to her closet. He empties a large plastic tough box that he intends to put the woman into. But as he's in the closet, I guess it's like a walk-in closet, the woman's blindfold, did I say that she was blindfold? I'm pretty sure I said that she was blindfold, but the woman's blindfold moves just enough that she can see that he is no longer in the room with her. And that's when she acts. She takes a deep breath, she tiptoes toward the door, she manages to open the door, and then this amazing woman runs, screaming like hell, down the outside hallway of the barracks room. Now remember, it's broad daylight. It's Sunday. Everyone's probably in the barracks room. She's completely naked, tied up, and the perpetrator is still in the room. When the perpetrator realizes what has just happened, he runs outside, he points the gun at the woman as she flees, but then he decides that he should run instead of shoot. Meanwhile, the woman is screaming, barracks residents start coming out, and somehow it's like 2 or 3 soldiers leap into action and they start chasing the perpetrator. While they sprinted, the perpetrator dropped his actual cell phone, and this would be what eventually gets him caught. And listen, the only way that the guy got away was because he jumped into his car and drove off. If not, I am sure that those other soldiers who had chased him, I bet you they would have caught up to him and just whomped on his butt. But also, those soldiers did take note of the car that the perpetrator was driving. After the guy fled, authorities were called. Clearly, everybody and their mama now knew that something was going down at Fort Cavazos, and the base immediately put out a base-wide alert. Fort Cavazos officials sent out a text alert to all soldiers in the area, warning them that there was a man with a gun near the barracks and to stay away. Essentially, the base locked down and the hunt for this perpetrator began. But with the phone, they don't have to look very hard. Even though the phone was locked, there was a very distinct picture as the screensaver. No, it was not a person. That would have been extra nice. But it was a picture of a motorcycle, a white striped motorcycle, which was later linked to the perpetrator. And the car that the perpetrator jumped into, yep, it was also tied to the same guy who drove the white striped motorcycle. And the perpetrator was a soldier by the name of Sergeant Greville Clarke with the 36th Engineer Brigade. I haven't found much information on this guy, except these few pictures right here that I found in Stars and Stripes. Task and Purpose did report that Clarke joined the Army in 2017 as a bridge crew member. But it wasn't until the day after that last attack on October 2nd, so it was on October 3rd, 2022, when Army CID and military police take Sergeant Greville Clarke and place him into pretrial confinement. They actually got him to come back in with a ruse by his supervisor, like, hey, you left your military ID card, come get it. Anyway, finally, after 18 months and 5 known victims, the barracks perpetrator was stopped. After Sergeant Clarke was taken into custody, there is this very visible sense of relief among the soldiers, especially the women who lived in the barracks room and heard of those prior attacks. But also, there was anger. How had this been going on for so long? Sergeant Clarke's capture answered the who, but it raised a lot of whys about the Army's system. First, though, the focus turned on prosecuting and getting justice for the survivors, and that process took a long time. After his arrest, Clarke was held in the Bell County Jail off post while the Army built the case against him. Investigators connected the dots between the attacks, partly because after he was taken in, Clarke sang like a canary. In fact, I read an article that indicated that even after they took him in, investigators weren't really thinking about the prior attacks. But thankfully, the cases were all eventually tied together, and those earlier victims from 2021 and early 2020 now had a known assailant. DNA evidence, stolen items found in his barracks room, and the similar MO all tied those cases back to Greville Clarke. In total, the Army charged Greville Clarke with 9 counts under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, covering 29 distinct criminal specifications. So let me break down what that included. Rape, multiple counts, attempted premeditated murder ×2, kidnapping, burglary, aggravated sexual contact, and sexual assault, assault with intent to commit rape and assault with intent to commit kidnapping, aggravated assault and assault consummated by battery, indecent visual recording, robbery, and obstruction of justice. It's a staggering list, reflecting just how extensive his crimes were. Clarke was ultimately arraigned on close to 30 specifications in October of 2024, which, if you're tracking, is 2 years after the last attack. Now, don't quote me on the number. I said 30-ish specifications because the articles I read are really unclear as to whether it was 27, 29, or 31 total specifications. But I'll tell you in a second the final number that stuck. By the way, I told you about 4 separate incidents with 5 victims. But KDH News reported that there was actually a 5th break-in that was documented in the charges, but that break-in was thankfully unsuccessful because just as the perpetrator was about to gain entry into another female soldier's room, I think he had put his foot in the door to stop it from closing, and that's when he heard a second person in the room. And at that point, he decided to abort his plan. So that's just a little side note. Clarke ended up pleading not guilty to all the charges, so the case went to a fully litigated court-martial. A court-martial, for my civilian viewers, is the name for a military trial. I don't think the defense had much to work with in this case, especially if there was DNA evidence tying the perpetrator to all of the crime scenes, but it's your right as a defendant to make the government prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, and if you have nothing else to lose, go for it. The 2-week court-martial was slotted for 2 weeks in April of 2025. But wait, this guy was difficult. I wish I knew more about his actual military performance before he got caught because no one has said anything about him. And the reason why I say that is because as a pretrial inmate, he was a giant butthead. And yeah, I did say butthead. I don't think I've ever heard of a court-martial. At least I haven't covered a case like this in the 5+ years where I've been covering cases like this, where a military defendant actually refused to attend his own court-martial. Oh yeah, this guy was like, I want to see all the evidence presented against me, but no, I don't actually want to be there. I'm not going to show my face. No. At the start of the court-martial, Lieutenant Mark Bohr, who was a Fort Cavazos police liaison officer, he testified that Clarke would likely be disruptive in the courtroom. In addition to being disruptive, he actually posed a security threat even if he was wearing a full-body restraint. By the way, Bohr has been transporting this guy for 2 years back and forth from the Bell County Detention Center to base, and it turns out that Clarke is a whiny baby biatch. What? Yes, I said a tiny, whiny baby biatch. Now, KDH News reported that Clarke had been placed on constant watch the weekend before the court-martial after he expressed thoughts of self-harm. Then, that Monday, he was involved in an altercation on base at Fort Cavazos. There's an on-post confinement facility there, and this is how it was described going down. So, it's Monday. Clarke asked for a toothbrush to brush his teeth. They gave him a toothbrush, but instead of brushing his teeth, he decided to knock over all of the lockers and headbutt everything. The military judge on this case was Colonel Maureen Khan. Now, Khan is spelled K-O-H-N, like John, but with a K, Khan. So maybe it's Khan. I don't know. But Colonel K spoke to Clarke remotely, and she asked him if he wanted to waive his right to be physically present for his trial. And he said yes. He said he was, quote, feeling rageful because he lost sleep while on suicide watch because they wouldn't turn off the lights, and he wasn't given the opportunity to shower in private before putting on his uniform. Clarke's defense team did not object to his absence, and the judge was like, the court-martial will go on without you. Hooray. This guy, he drives me crazy. I think, honestly, that what he did here speaks volume of him in general. Even in the end, Clarke didn't have the courage to look at the women whose lives he destroyed. He was an absolute coward. Which, honestly, I wonder if his absence was beneficial for the victims to not have to look that monster in the face. Although, as a former Special Victims Counsel, I can also imagine a scenario where this monster once again took the victim's choice away from them. And I hate that for them. When the court-martial began, this was a judge-alone case. The prosecution told the judge about the horrific experiences of 5 survivors. The prosecutor walked through the 4 dates: March 16th, 2021, March 5th, 2022, July 15th, 2022, and October 2nd, 2022. The prosecution discussed how after he was detained, Clarke confessed to his calculated plan to attack each of those women. During the trial, the survivors testified, and even though Clarke wasn't present, each survivor told their story. These women were incredibly brave to testify, recounting those traumatic events in detail. Various people also testified, like one Barracks resident, a specialist. This male specialist testified that on October 2nd, he was sitting in his 3rd floor barracks room just listening to music. Remember, it's Sunday morning. While he was in his room, he saw a flash kind of like run past his window, and the person was screaming for help. The soldier got dressed and ran outside to see a man in dark clothing running from the building. Behind him were 2 soldiers seemingly exhausted because they were trying to catch this man. When the specialist tried to make sense of what the hell was going on, he looked around and saw another barracks resident blocking her door. Just past that door, inside of that barracks room, was a woman completely nude, but she was wearing what appeared to be a belt attached to her waist, like a leash. The specialist later found out that the victim had been attacked in her room and had actually gotten away. During the court-martial, we also learned that Clarke used various methods to gain entry into the rooms. He used a key, for example, but it was unclear in the article that I read how this key would have gained him.
ChatGPT Plus is free for college students through May. Here's the thing. You've got a lot to do between now and then. Studying for finals, writing papers, trying to keep your life on track. And ChatGPT can help with all of it. It can quiz you for your econ exam, make a study guide from your French notes, plan out your meals and study breaks. It can get really specific on how you like to learn. It can even help you come up with ways to stop procrastinating. So from now until summer break, take advantage of all the ways ChatGPT can make your life easier. Restrictions apply.
Ladies, you'll end up shopping for your guy's deodorant, right? So try Degree's Original Cool Rush. You see, last year, Degree changed the formula, and men were mad. One guy even started a petition. So Degree admitted they messed up and brought the Original Cool Rush scent back. It's clean, crisp, and actually smells like someone you want to cuddle. And it's in Walmart, Target, and other stores now for under $4. So toss one in your cart and find out why it's the best-selling men's antiperspirant for the last decade. Degree Cool Rush is back, and it smells like victory.
Entry into other people's rooms. But anyway, he also entered the rooms by opening a window and then basically reaching his arm around the window to unlock the door. And he even used his military uniform with NCO stripes to convince residents to open their doors in the middle of the night. During the trial, the judge also got to hear Clarke's own confession, since it had been recorded by CID. It was during his CID interview that Clarke connected himself to the other barracks crimes. Now, I'm not sure if this man was ever convicted of this next crime, but Stars and Stripes reported that during his CID interview, Clarke actually confessed to a crime that CID wasn't even tracking. And they weren't tracking it because the case was being handled by Fort Cavazos police instead of CID. So for those of you wondering, there are Fort Cavazos police, which are military police, and then you have the CID office. And so they're different. Like the cops are cops and the CID are investigators. And so in this particular case, apparently, I don't know what the facts of that incident were, but that was being investigated by the military police, not CID. Whether those were part of the court-martial, I am also not 100% sure. During the court-martial, the judge also learned that Clarke owned 6 guns personally. But since you are not allowed to have guns in the barracks rooms, he stored them at other people's homes. Now that I'm thinking about this off script, I'm wondering if any of the people who maintained the guns for him were ever called to testify, right? Because Did he always just kind of secretly keep one of his 6 guns with him so he could just commit a crime whenever he wanted to? Or would he like have to go search for it at his friend's house? Like, interesting. Anyway, after all of the evidence was presented, in late April 2025, the military judge found Clarke guilty of 27 specifications. The only thing that he wasn't convicted of were a second count of attempted murder or attempted premeditated murder and 1 count of attempted fraudulent use of a credit card. But everything else, the rapes, the assaults, the kidnapping, guilty, guilty, guilty. I have not seen the charge sheet to know exactly where that additional attempted premeditated murder charge came from, the one that he was acquitted of. But I imagine it was from the final October 2nd attack, where Clarke admitted that he pointed the gun at the 5th victim, but didn't pull the trigger, instead opting to run. I believe that this might be, if I'm thinking of those 4 incidents, that this might be the one where the prosecution was like, hey, let's charge him with attempted premeditated murder. And the judge, kind of saw right through that. It's possible, but I really don't know. At the sentencing hearing, which took place on April 24th, 2025, the survivors got to give victim impact statements, which I can only imagine if I was sitting there, how terribly sad those statements would make me. At least 2 of the victims told the judge to not show this guy any leniency. And the woman who Clarke nearly strangled to death in July of 2022, well, she delivered a very powerful statement. She said in part, quote, "I want this man to suffer in fear for the rest of his life. I want him to have a long life behind bars, wondering when God will decide to give him his last breath," end quote. At the sentencing phase, Clarke's lawyers presented that Clarke had an abusive childhood. Apparently, he grew up in a terribly violent home. He lost his mom at the age of 2, his father was deported, and he was left to be raised by a stepmother who beat him daily. The defense also had the perpetrator's family members take the stand and testify that he wasn't a monster to them and that they would support him if he ever got out of prison. It's the kind of mitigating evidence that you present in a penalty phase of a case. It's essentially saying, listen, this guy has had a rough life, but so have the victims. After it was all said and done at sentencing, the military judge pretty much agreed with the victims. Let this man rot in jail. She handed down the maximum penalty allowed by law. Greville Clarke was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole, and that was for the attempted premeditated murder. Plus, you attach an additional 112 and a half years, which is tacked on consecutively for all the other crimes. Essentially, consecutively means even if some parole board decades from now tried to release this guy on the life term, he'd then have to start serving the 112.5-year sentence. He's effectively never getting out of jail. He was also, in addition to the time in prison, his punishment included reduction to the lowest rank, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, and he also received a dishonorable discharge from the Army. Now, as a final note, this guy will serve his time at the U.S. Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, which is the military's maximum security prison, although I bet that at some point he will be transferred to a different federal prison. Greville Clarke is 32 years old now. He will likely die in prison. The prosecution made a point that this outcome was also a victory for the Army's justice system. The newly created Office of Special Trial Counsels, or OSTC, they were the ones that handled this case, which is a new independent prosecutorial authority set up after those Fort Hood reforms. After Clarke's conviction, the OSTC, or the Office of Special Trial Counsel, they basically said, hey, this program works. It shows that even a sergeant, a high-ranking sergeant like Clarke, could be held accountable at the highest level without command interference. And indeed, the OSTC prosecutors publicly thanked the survivors for their courage, and they hoped that this verdict would bring some measure of peace. But wait, after the trial, the Army didn't exactly, pat itself on the back. There was a recognition that this case never should have happened in the first place, or at least that Greville Clarke should have been stopped much sooner. But why wasn't he? This is the question that lingers, and it's something the Army and outside experts have been grappling with for a very long time. Based on everything we know, there was some systematic issues that allowed Clarke's crimes to basically persist as long as they did. One issue is the security lapses in the barracks. Many barracks at Fort Hood had problems like broken locks, inadequate lighting, and lack of surveillance cameras. Clarke exploited this. He could slip in and out of buildings without being recorded. Soldiers told GAO investigators that unsecured doors could allow an intruder to enter the barracks and assault service members, and in this case, one literally did. Another issue was underestimating the threat, and I think that is something that we all do. Initially, it seems that the base might have seen the first attacks in 2021 as isolated incidents, or maybe even possible that they doubted the victim. We know one survivor wasn't believed at first by some people, and he actually tried to kill her. If those in charge had realized immediately that a serial offender was at work, they may have ramped up patrols or warned everyone in the barracks to be on high alert, maybe even preventing later attacks. Because remember, the July 2022 victim opened the door to this sergeant at 2 o'clock in the morning because she was like, oh, maybe he's someone in leadership. Maybe I need to open the door. Clarke seemed to have evaded authorities for more than a year and a half, and it's not clear what measures, if any, the base took in between each of those incidents. Another issue is the slow investigative linkage. It took until after Clarke's final attack to conclusively link him to all those crimes. In hindsight, all the attacks obviously formed a pattern. The same base, the same barracks, the same victims, females living on base, the same MO, entering at odd hours, and he always had a weapon. There's criticism that Army CID perhaps didn't connect the dots publicly or quickly enough. However, without knowing who it was or what that person looked like, CID did have little to go on. Now, Clarke left almost no evidence and disguised himself. It was a tough case, and CID likely pieced it together fully once they had him in custody, and he confessed. Another issue that we can talk about is climate and culture. Fort Hood's overall climate, remember that permissive environment finding? That may have contributed. If junior soldiers felt that reporting issues wouldn't lead to action, or if people didn't initially believe them, that's a cultural failing. One victim said, quote, "It felt like a dream, like it wasn't real. When I would seek help, people didn't believe me." And this was why she was describing her disbelief and the lack of immediate validation of her story. That suggests that some in the command or community were in denial that something like this could have happened on their watch. Now we have the Fort Hood Independent Review of 2020. They found strong evidence that sexual harassment and sexual assault were underreported on this base. If reports aren't taken seriously, then predators, basically, they can continue offending with a blank check. In response to this case, advocacy groups and experts have stressed the need for better barrack security and a cultural change. The GAO in 2023, they urged the Department of Defense to improve barracks safety standards after finding these vulnerabilities. They also noted that over 30% of military sexual assault reports from 2015 to 2021 occurred in on-base housing, including the barracks, which is supposed to be a safe place. That's truly unacceptable. And this highlights one thing. What happened at Fort Hood isn't just a Fort Hood issue. It's possibly an issue across many installations and all of the military branches. After the Vanessa Guillen case and others, the Army has been implementing reforms. For one, there was the creation of the Office of Special Trial Counsel, which took this case to trial. And the stand-up of the OSTC means independent military prosecutors now handle all serious crimes like sexual assault and murder instead of leaving these things up to the command. Let the command focus on commanding, not on prosecuting people and taking action, right? And clearly, in Clarke's case, the OSTC did a very thorough job and they got convictions. Fort Hood, now Fort Cavazos, also reportedly started fixing those physical security issues. But listen, if you're watching this, you'll have to tell me in the comments if these issues at Fort Cavazos have actually been fixed, talking about in the barracks room. So if you know anyone who's at Fort Cavazos or live in the barracks room, send them this video so that they can comment and let us know. Like, let me know, are the issues being resolved? You know, there was talk of initially with the GAO 2023 report, they were talking about repairing door locks and improving lighting and adding security cameras or key card access to barracks rooms. And listen, that's all really important, but you have to remember that in the military, we have this culture where someone is always in charge of you. So maybe we need to remind people also that you have to be extra careful. Maybe call someone, say like, hey, why is so-and-so showing up at my room at 2:00 in the morning? I know it's like really strange, but I'll tell you this. In my house, when someone rings the doorbell, if I wasn't expecting anyone, and this might be like, I don't know, a millennial thing, but at my house, if someone rings the doorbell and I wasn't expecting anyone, I won't answer. I'll just be like, doo-doo-doo. Like, I'm not answering. I'm not looking. I mean, sometimes I look at my camera and if it's someone who's staring there, I'm like looking to see who they are. But I mean, that's very different, right? When you live in a barracks room and you are a lower ranking soldier. So these are things that we need to also talk about. As I said, I don't have the full report card on Fort Cavazos' progress, but awareness is higher now. Soldiers themselves apparently were warning each other on social media after news of Clarke's arrest broke, pointing out those safety issues and demanding change. And I know when this first broke that on my military murder Facebook group, people were talking about it. I think that after a case like this, there's also more emphasis on victim support and believing those who come forward. The survivors in this case, they demonstrated incredible resilience. One of them, the October 2022 victim, she actually stayed in the Army. She's now a sergeant herself, and she told the court how she carries the trauma, but also how she's trying to move forward. She got married and even completed extreme physical challenges as part of her healing. But she also admitted that she still can't take a shower without fear. She now only buys see-through shower curtains so that no one can ever hide behind one of them again. Another survivor, the one from July of 2022, I mentioned earlier that she was only 19 years old. She said that she was so traumatized that she couldn't continue serving in the military at all. These details show that the impact of Clarke's crimes will last a lifetime for his victims. The Army owes it to them and to all soldiers to ensure barracks are sanctuaries, not hunting grounds for predators. I really hope that the Army learned from this case. It's scary to think something like this can happen at all. And listen, it's not just the Army. I said this already. It's all military branches. I think this case shook a lot of people up. Fort Cavazos will always carry the scars of what happened in this particular case. But in exposing this predator and holding him accountable, the Army has sent a pretty strong message. Clarke's life behind bars is a warning to anyone who might try to prey on their brothers or sisters in arms. You will be caught, and guess what? You're gonna lose everything. And for the rest of us, it's a reminder that vigilance and a culture of looking out for each other are very important. If someone reports a sexual assault, believe them, protect them, investigate it properly to, come to a conclusion. Those 5 women, they had to fight to be heard, but ultimately, their voices put a stop to a serial rapist. Today, Clarke sits in a prison cell, likely for the rest of his natural life. The survivors of his violence are hopefully on a path of healing now, knowing that he can never hurt anyone else again. And Fort Cavazos, the Army, is hopefully making changes to ensure something like this never happens on their watch in the future. So that's the story. It's a tough one, a story of horrific crimes, but also of justice served. And if you or anyone you know has been affected by sexual violence, especially in the military, please reach out to the support resources available, like the DoD Safe Helpline. You're not alone, and there are people who will believe you, and there are people that can actually help. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for watching and listening. If you found this educational, please like this video. You are amazing. If you're new here and you want to hear more stories involving the military or veteran community, specifically as it relates to crime, be sure to subscribe to my channel, check out my podcast, Military Murder, wherever you listen, and you can follow me on social media as well. My sources for this episode include various articles in Task and Purpose, Stars and Stripes, KDH News, Fort Cavazos Herald, Military.com, and Army.mil. Until next time, remember, you never really know what someone is capable of, so remain vigilant always. You have a fabulous week, and I'll keep digging to bring you another military crime story next time.